So I have a really old game from an old console that I played quite a lot when I was a kid. I have lots of happy memories of playing the game. I remember the time where I'm only allowed to play my PS2 at Saturday or Sunday by my parents, and I also remember how at the very early in the morning, I wake up just to sneak my way into playing a PS2 when my parents are still asleep. Years later, I'm an adult and I have my own personal responsibilities, which can be very tiresome and boring, so playing video games is still something that I do occasionally. While these modern games can be fun and exciting, there are times where I do crave myself some good old PS2 games, and even going back to the games that I have never played as a kid and wanting to experience it for the first time as an adult just to know how it plays. The thing is, I grew up with the PS2 that has some barely functioning audio when everyone is having a PS3 and Xbox 360, so while I don't have the latest and greatest gaming technology when I was a kid, I'm actually glad that I don't, because at the end of the day, gaming is about fun, and these old games that I played are still fun and amazing, and I can appreciate them despite their age. However, there's a bit of a problem. I used to have a PS2, but unfortunately it was broken and it's nowhere to be seen again. The PS2 is out of production for a long time now, but thankfully hacked and bootleg PS2s are sold everywhere in my country if you just search in online shopping websites like Tokopedia, and they're pretty cheap too. The problem is, setting them up is a little bit difficult. The PS2 uses the RCA cables that are not as common as today on modern TVs, or at least in my monitor, because all of them uses HDMI these days. I need to buy myself a separate adapter to connect it to my monitor. I would have that problem if I actually bought the thing, but as much as I do want to feel nostalgic and hearing it turn on again, it's all thanks to the PCSX2 emulator on a PC that makes all of that redundant. The emulator can play pretty much almost all of the PS2 games as long as you have good hardware, and it has other neat features like upscaling, widescreen resolution fixes, and of course cheat codes, which are rather complicating to set up on a PCSX2 actually. But hey, the PCSX2 is a more advanced software solution, and I say advanced because apparently not a lot of people can figure out how to use the thing, which kinda surprises me. So if it weren't for the bootleggers, the repairmen refurbishing and renewing some of the broken consoles, and the emulator team developing the softwares to let us be able to play the games, we are not going to be able to enjoy a lot of these PS2 classics that are not yet released or remastered for our consumption. The same applies to a lot of game consoles that are out of production these days. Technology marches on, and as technology moves forward, companies who create those technologies strive to innovate even further to be bigger, better, and more efficient than last time. They will create better products to satisfy their customers and meet their demands of wanting more and wanting better. In result, those better products become their main focus, and their older products will get discontinued. This is to be expected to a lot of products these days. It's not just limited to game consoles. I don't think people are listening to their music on iPods when you can get Spotify on the phone. I actually used to have an old MP3 player where I put all my music in. I can't remember the product name, but it looks like this Sony Walkman, except significantly cheaper. These MP3 players are either going extinct or they're made by cheap Chinese companies that want to appeal to the boomers out there. The same goes for game consoles. Game consoles will eventually get replaced by something better, or at least technically speaking. There are still loads of people who think that the PS2 is the greatest console that Sony has ever made, and I can agree to that sentiment, but we can also agree that the PS5 is their most recent one, and one that they put so much focus on. One that still struggles to be sold everywhere thanks to the presence of scalpers grabbing these consoles by the hundreds, and apparently you have to feel sorry for them. But Sony can't put their focus on all of their consoles at the same time, especially when most of the quote-unquote mainstream gamers strive for games to look better, play better, sound better, and with the DualSense controller that they have, feel better. So they just decide to discontinue the production of their consoles. The PS1, PS2, and PS3 are pretty much discontinued, and the PS4 is reaching the end of its life cycle. And of course, there's the PSP and the PS Vita. Sony has pretty much ditched any ideas of going portable the moment Vita didn't go so well on them, and Nintendo dominating the market with its hybrid console. It won't stop them from trying though. When those consoles stopped in production, the exclusive games for those consoles are pretty much unplayable for the future generations if they don't have those consoles, or at least if they try to acquire them through the official means. This is why we have console emulators on the PC. It's so that we can still play these games in the future, especially games that these game companies don't sell anymore, or games that game companies prevent you from buying anymore. All of this can be prevented if we have backwards compatibility. Newer hardware supporting the softwares from the older hardware is an excellent way to make sure that the investment that we made on the previous gen hardwares aren't just pissing in the wind. But the problem is, or at least on the PlayStation console, the backwards compatibility is pretty much non-existent. PS3's backwards compatibility to PS PS2 only exists on certain fat models, and PS4's backwards compatibility to PS3 is non-existent, except if the developers of those older games care enough to port them into the next gen. The PS5 does support PS4 backwards compatibility, but not the other games in the platforms, so it's really up to Sony and the developers to migrate their games into the PS4 as much as they can. And even then, there are still games left for the PS3 limbo, waiting for its developers to announce a re-release or a remaster, or at the very least a simple port for the entire thing. Now, I've already talked about this on my video last year, where instead of hopping onto the next gen console's hype, which is current gen console right now, I decided to go back into the PS3. Unfortunately, the PS3 is now bust due to the dreaded yellow light of death, and I don't have time to fix the entire thing. I went back one gen because there are loads of amazing games that I want to play in that console, like the original Demon's Souls, which some people actually argue is the better version than the remake. Looking back, while the PS3 that I bought is a bust, I still think the idea of buying one is worth it. Now, if you guys missed it, Sony decided to completely discontinue the sales of the PS3, PS Vita, and PSP games on the PlayStation Store. That's right, the PlayStation Store for those platforms are going to be closed, meaning you cannot buy any digital copies of those games from those platforms anymore on the 2nd of July 2021 for the PS3 and the PSP, and the 27th of August 2021 for the PS Vita. It's still available at the time of this video, but if you already went past those dates, then you have survived the Great Apocalypse. Congratulations! To be clear, you are still able to re-download and play previously purchased titles, video or media content, you can redeem PS Plus vouchers, and you will still be able to re-download and play games that are claimed from the PS Plus, as long as you remain a member of the service. So it's not all doom and gloom, but the fact that you cannot buy a lot of these games on the PlayStation Store anymore means that Sony cares about backwards compatibility about as much as they care about the Japanese gaming industry. But wait a second, if the stores are closing down, why is it worth it for me to buy a PS3 at the time? Well, it's because the PS3 that I got is outfitted with a custom firmware that allows me to use this thing called Multiman, which allows me to install PS3 games acquired from Jack Sparrow's most trusted networks on the depths of Tortuga. At this point, that's one of the few ways for you to acquire PS3 games alongside buying them used, but there are also other risks of buying used. The game needs to have a physical copy in the first place, and even then, you're probably not gonna get all the DLCs, especially since you can't buy them these days. And that is assuming that they still work, and that is assuming that the game is priced accordingly, because there are certain used games that are ridiculously expensive. This is pretty much not a win for Sony, and once again, Sony gives me a reason to not purchase any of their stuff. The Xbox's backwards compatibility is phenomenal, so phenomenal that the Series S can actually be used as a machine to play old games with little to no effort. Unfortunately, PlayStation is still trying its hardest to catch up with Xbox's level of backwards compatibility, or more accurately, don't try to catch up. And this is just more reason for any gaming enthusiast to not care about the PlayStation console. And I say gaming enthusiasts because, let's face it, going back to older games are things that only gaming enthusiasts do, as in gamers who really care about their hobby and dedicate themselves to spending loads and loads of hours and money into the hobby. And I'm not talking about those who spend thousands of dollars on FIFA Ultimate Team or something. No, I'm talking about those who would spend thousands of dollars collecting all sorts of games, or even just a couple of hundreds of dollars for playing those older games. I'm talking about people who have a more diverse range of taste and are willing to play games from many different platforms from many different generations, because they're still games and they're still fun. Unfortunately, Sony is not giving us the option to pay them for these products, so a lot of gaming enthusiasts have to resort into sailing the 7 seas in order for them to acquire the games that they want. And yes, there are still loads of games, great games I might add, that are still stuck on the PS3 and so many consoles in the past, because the developers don't have time to remaster the games for the future generations. Those games will just remain there for eternity to become a relic of the past that these companies want us to forget, despite the fact that we have tons of great memories with them. In regards to backwards compatibility, the PC is still a superior platform. It's incredibly rare for me to find a game from the past that just doesn't work on a PC. The fact that it can play PC games and emulate older games from older platforms is still quite impressive to me, and porting older games into the PC platform is the most definitive way to maintain their longevity and to make sure that the game is still playable in the near future. Unfortunately, going backwards take a lot of money, risk, and actual effort. It's nice to see that certain game companies realize that their legacy is worth preserving, and it would be critical for us to reward them for their good deeds into contributing for the preservation of their older titles. Japanese game companies especially, they too have been moving on from relying too much on the console manufacturers into actually actually dipping their toes into the PC market, which works really well for them. I do want to see more and more of them do this, especially when their console manufacturers have been ditching them like an unwanted stepchild. In conclusion, this move made by Sony is still really disappointing. My opinions on Sony is already pretty low considering the amount of censorship they did towards Japanese games, but now they're only giving me more reasons not to support them. I have money to pay you, Sony, but you're not giving me the product that earns that money. If you don't give me backwards compatibility, you don't get my money. If you don't stop the censorship, you don't get my money. Plain and simple. But with all of that being said, there are things that Sony, in my opinion, did really well. The DualShock 4 is still my favorite controller to use for the PC. The DualShock 4 back button is a really good add-on as well. I love it and it can be used on a PC as well. I just don't like everything else that Sony did. Who knows? Maybe in the near future, Sony will decide to do something to mitigate the backwards compatibility problem, and maybe that would give me a reason to stick with their console. But as of right now, my PS4 still works just fine, and there aren't a lot of games that warrant the purchase of the PS5 for me. Funnily enough, Sony has the same problem that Nintendo has, but Nintendo will always go one step further, but two steps back. They do care of their legacy games, they're just being greedy and scummy about it. Skyward Sword for $60? Really? Also, rest in peace Super Mario 3D All-Stars. You will be missed and your game files will be dumped into the nearest bay for all the hack switches and Yuzu users out there, assuming that it works. But at that point, you can just emulate those 3 games on the PC anyway, and no amount of cash will be given to the greedy mega corporation.